I stayed in a haunted house for 4 years.
And I've met people who have actually, they've encountered these ghosts.
And Mumbai as a city provides you a lot of material for writing horror.
So it was bound to happen that I'd be writing horror once or later.
I hope that this festival has already gotten a rocking start. I hope the tempo keeps on till the end of the day.
Okay, guys, so we are live and
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi,
everyone.
NILUTPAL.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
hi guys. So hello friends, my name is SIDDHARTH NIRWAN and I welcome you all to Bhoot-Con. One of its kind, in fact, first of its kind of horror online festival of India. And I'm very delighted today as a horror fan because today, that is for the next 5 hours, we shall talk, hear, watch and breathe nothing but our beloved genre. And to kickstart this Litfest, we have a fantastic session on the evolution of horror writing in India. And the speakers that we have on the panel are all super dhasu in their all respective fields. And just to begin with Mr. Neil D'Silva. Neil D'Silva is India's most well-known horror author. His books have been published by country's top publication houses like Rupa, Hachette and Penguin. He's a TEDx speaker. He conducted an elaborate 6-hour writing workshop at IIT Kanpur in 2019 and is a founder of Lit Venture. He has a major YouTube show called On the Bookshelf, on which I am to feature yet, and in which he talks with eminent personalities from the Indian publishing world. He has featured on a number of talks on various platforms, and recently, it's a great honor, a great news for the horror community, especially the horror writers community of India, that he has been appointed as the president of the Indian chapter of the International Horror Writers Association. So I welcome you, sir, and I congratulate you.
Thank you, Siddharth. Pleasure to be here. I hope that this festival has already gotten a rocking start. I hope the tempo keeps on till the end of the day.
Okay. So next, move on
Because he's there in the last session too.
Yeah.
And
So
next,
I'm really hoping for it.
to the next speaker. And SUHAIL MATHUR is an award-winning author of the historical mythological fiction, The Bhairaputras, and the mythological fantasy, The Hunt for Rama's Bow. He's a TEDx speaker and is one of India's top literary agents via his agency, Bookbakers. I think that is an understatement. You are not one of the India's top literary agent. You are the India's top literary agent, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And
No doubt on that.
Bookbakers, he has worked on more than 500 books. And in the past, he has also worked as a cricket commentator for Star Sports and the Airtel mobile app. And if I should say so, then SUHAIL MATHUR is perhaps one of the few, in fact, a rare person from the mainstream publishing industry who has always promoted horror. So I welcome you, SUHAIL, and I thank you for your support.
Thanks, Siddharth. Thank you so much. Cheers, guys.
We'll have cheers afterwards the session. Afterwards.
Okay.
Done.
So moving on to ABHIRUP, a banker by profession. He's passionate about writing and has been doing so ever since he was a child. He has published 2 non-horror books, once again with Love and Stories Are Magical, before delving into horror with Hold That Breath. It went on to become the Amazon bestseller charts. It went on to top the Amazon bestseller charts for months since the very first day of its release and was amongst its best reads. Recipient of various awards and honor for his notable works, one of his upcoming books has already been acquired by a reputable production house for screen adaptation. I welcome you, ABHIRUP.
Thank you so much.
Now, moving on to the next speaker. Prachi Sharma is a feminist, editor, clinical pharmacist, a book critic, and a blogger, and a content writer and a crime novelist. I think I'm just talking about one panelist over here, right? And not many. Okay. She is the author of crime thrillers like The Alphabet Killer, The Railway Killer, The Dark Side of Innocence, When He Remembered, Bloody Desires, and Tea Time for the Jilted Lover. 2 of her short stories, including The Invisible Neighbors and The Gentleman at the Corner Table, have been published by Juggernaut, and her upcoming novel is A Predator in Paradise, to be published very soon. Recently, she's writing her first horror book. I welcome you, Prachi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome to Horror Prachi.
Thank
Well,
you.
you're in the right company.
Yeah. I could not have started out with a better group of horror writers as someone who's just delving into it.
And last but not the least, Nilutpal GOHAIN is a bureaucrat with the government of Assam. Many of his short stories and poems have been published in the literary journals such as Muse India, Spillwords, Setu, The Huns India. He is one of the winners of the first edition of the Half Baked Beans co-author project and went on to publish his first full-length co-authored dystopian novel named 2035, which has received amazing reviews. His story Namu Ne, published in the horror anthology of City Screams, has been well received by the readers and highly praised. His other works include The Broken Bridge, published in the HBB horror anthology, and The Funeral, a dark comedy published in the anthology A Fallen Leaf by Panmansi. He is currently working on a true crime novel based in the 1970s in Assam with the Bookbakers and which also has traces of paranormal and mysticism. I welcome you, Nilutpal.
Thank you, Siddharth, and hello everyone. It's nice to be
Hi
here.
Nilutpal, best wishes for the book.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you, Neil, sir, first. Today's questions are going to be very open, very practical, and maybe
Yeah.
critical, because that's our aim is.
Looking forward to those.
But why you speaking like Arnab Goswami?
No,
You did
Nation
not
wants
find
to
any other
know.
comparison for me?
I got possessed.
Oh,
So maybe Jayalani in the last session can exercise me and get the.
So we have started by naming the horror characters that we know.
Okay. So Neil sir, I'll start with you. And Neil
Yeah.
sir, you have been there. You have been there. When you arrived on the scene, there was no one writing horror regularly. Of course, there were people. Okay, so there were people who had written one or two books, and then they had just disappeared like the boots. Okay, of Bhoot-Con. So, what, in your opinion, was the reason that the writers did not think, or maybe they believed, that horror writing cannot ever be successful in India? Why do you think before that? I mean, it was not there for many years, for decades, and I'm talking about in English fiction in India.
Yeah. See, the thing is, horror has never been a very prominent genre in India. Not for the last 20 or 30 years before I started writing. I don't recall anybody who, dedicatedly wrote horror except for maybe Ruskin Bond. But Ruskin Bond stories are also, a different kind of horror. It is more of the atmospheric thing that we are so much used to and we love them. But apart from that, horror never got a boost. So maybe the reason was the way horror was perceived in India. It's starting with the films. Like when the Ramsays made their films, horror was a big thing. That was in the 80s. Horror was quite big at that time. But that was more about supernatural horror. It was more about visual effects. It was more about the lore and also at that same time, horror started getting a kind of B level name. It was not a mainstream name because of the way the movies were made. It was made with tacky makeup, and you know how the characters were, and there were also these sex scenes put in, which was only boosted when Vikram Bhatt came on the scene. Then horror became Horrocks. Now, maybe this was the reason why horror was not given a prime space, because it was considered as a kind of genre which was a mm, kind of guilty pleasure, and that is why people wanted to read horror, and nobody would want to openly admit that, okay, I'm reading horror. It was not a respectable thing, to be very honest, in India for many years. Now what happened is, out there in the West, so I have been researching and I have been reading horror right from my childhood. Like, I have grown up in people like Poe and Stoker and stuff like that. So reading those people, and King, of course, Stephen King, knowing that kind of horror and knowing the kind of stories that can be built around the horror element, and I tried to bring that in my first book, My As You Husband. So what I did was, I gave a boost to not just the horror as an element, but to the story itself. And maybe slowly, that is where a lot of then writers like you, Siddharth and Abhirup and everyone else out here, we started understanding that horror is also about the stories. We already knew that, but now we put the story out in front. And that is where I think horror started getting its name once again. And now it has become one of the genres that literature cannot avoid. Indian, now you know that Suhail knows very well that horror is also now being accepted everywhere. It's in the bookstores, it's on the Litfest, and that is the thing. So I think the one sentence answer to your question was that horror had lost its respectability in India, and that respectability came back in the last 5 years. It has come back, and that is why people are reading horror again. That's what I feel.
Thank you very much. Suhail, my question is to you now. My first question to you would be to Suhail as the author, Suhail Mathur, the author. Now, bhai, as I mentioned about your books, The Bhairaputras and The Hunt for Rama's Bow, now both of them are mythological fantasy and mythological historical genre. So what is there in horror that excites you? Or in other words, what is the fatal attraction that horror genre has for you?
Okay.
Suhail.
Thanks, Siddharth. I think it's a valid question, but you know what? Also, there's something that I'd like to add. That apart, I also wrote a short story, which is a part of City of Screams, and I'd written it, of course, much earlier. That's based on a true story. So, just for everyone's knowledge, my interest with horror actually started very early because I stayed. Yeah, that's City of Screams there. So, my interest with horror started very early because I stayed in a haunted house for 4 years. And I shifted from there, when I was in the prep standard. But a lot of information that came about of that place and, the various happenings that happened at that place, so on and so forth, were told to me by my parents. So, and the surprising thing was that, it's not just that the hauntings ended when we left and, there were our neighbors who met us 4 years after, on Diwali. And we happened to mention, the strange happenings that used to happen over there. And, they just gave a wry smile and I half assumed that, they were trying to rubbish what we were saying. And they came up with some extra information as to what all spooky events happened after we left, which we were unaware of, So that's when I actually got interested in horror, because for me, it isn't really about the fact that it happened. That's not scary for me. The fact that it happened in reality is what is scary, because that is something that enhances the spookiness of it all, because it just means that, whatever these wonderful people are writing, even as fiction, can very well happen in your real life. So I've been very, very interested in real life horror stories because that is what interests me a lot, which is why the first story that I wrote, a short story, which is also in City of Screams, is a story which is a personal story in the sense that, it happened with my grandfather and it's inspired by real events. So, I, for one, did something in the writing space over there. But, what I really felt was that Neil started writing a lot of horror, in that period. So, I wrote that story for the first time in 2014. And I think 15 is when Neil wrote Maya's New Husband, if I'm not mistaken, Neil. Around that time. Yeah.
14, 15.
So, yeah. So, what happened was that one book came out, then another. And also I saw that, there was someone who was really high on bringing out horror. And I had, of course, read your book, SIDDHARTH, as well, Last Witch Trial, which I really enjoyed. So, the idea was to create a talent pool of authors, who could write in the horror genre. See, as far as the publishing industry is concerned, I would say that they are very averse to risk. Okay. Why horror wasn't looked into or looked at by publishers was simply because horror hadn't sold for them. And on what basis was that figure based is unknown, because they had not brought out a horror book, or they had not brought out too many to understand whether the genre would be successful or not. So, it's always about the first mover advantage. So the first mover advantage can either help you because, nobody else is there as a competition, or it can backfire because there'll be nobody to support you. But my argument always remains that unless you do not give an opportunity to somebody, how will you get to know whether something's working or not, right? So I'm happy that, finally things fell into place, and of late, a lot of horror books are being acquired by publishing houses. The only thing I would like and urge them to look at would be, a lot of horror fiction also in the mainstream. So we've seen a shift as far as horror non-fiction is concerned. But I think what everyone also needs to learn is that there are going to be as many stories as there possibly could be, right? Unless people are going to invent it. But if they're going to invent it, then it becomes fiction. So you need to give fiction its due, because there's no difference in the writing style. If the same writer who's writing a non-fiction is writing a fiction, the spooks are guaranteed for sure, right? So I think an effort from the publisher's end has been made. Let's hope that trend continues. A major factor in that will also be not just quality, which we all are very confident about, but also the sales figures, because at the end of the day, it all works on commercials for publishing houses. So if the numbers come in, if the readers in India support, brilliant authors like the ones in the panel, and some of them who are going to follow in today's literary festival, I think the future of horror will be very secure.
Thank you for saying that, Suhail.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Actually, what you have done is that you have answered my second question also that I
wanted to save your time.
But horror, I can ask you and many questions as I can. Now moving on to ABHIRUP, and ABHIRUP, I have known you for the past 3 years, but the
Right.
connected over 3 years ago was something very different. I mean, it had 6 stories, and yes, horror was there in that book, but that was not the highlight of the book, right?
It was one of the stories of the book. Right?
Yeah, and then you wrote Hold That Breath, and after that you have become unstoppable in horror. So what is there in horror genre that has hooked you and is not letting you go?
So let me tell you one thing, Siddharth, and you know it very well that I'm a big horror buff, right? I've always been a horror buff. It's been my favorite genre, followed by thrillers and then maybe love stories. But again, I personally feel love stories are very easily written. So I wanted to do something different and, challenge the writer in me. That's when I thought that fine, let me take a plunge and let me understand if I can be a good enough writer for horror. And then I wrote Hold That Breath, and yes, it's been a great journey so far. As far as I'm concerned, horror in English literature has been a trend in the last 5 years, and to be very honest, it's because of Neil De Silva's Maya's New Husband in 2014 or 2015, after which the genre got a boost. Prior to this, there was Ruskin Bond. He himself tells that when he runs short of people, he weaves a story on ghosts. But to be very honest, his ghosts are not very scary, right? You'll have to agree with me here. So he writes about sad ghosts, happy ghosts, friendly ghosts, more like Casper. Brilliant writer, legendary author. But as far as English literature is concerned, it's only been after Neil De Silva's Maya's New Husband that this genre has got a boost. However, if I have to talk about regional literature, there is Narayan Dharup. There was Narayan Dharup, rather, he's no more. Mr. Ratnakar Matkari. And if I talk about
Still topping
Bengali literature,
Narayan Dharup's
we
books.
talk about Bengali literature. Yeah, absolutely. Tumbar was based on one of his books, right? So, and if I talk about Satyajit Ray, so he wrote a lot of Bengali ghost stories once upon a time. There were stories like Annath, Babur Boy, and so many stories that I read when I was a child. I loved all of them, and there were a couple of other Bengali writers like Leela Majumdar and Sharadendra Bandyopadhyay. Apart from that, I grew up on R.L. Stein, and I was a big fan of R.L. Stein once upon a time. And then, of course, King, the master storyteller himself, horror. So it was bound to happen that I'd be writing horror once or later. And then I wrote one, Hold That Breath, and it's been a good journey so far. And looking forward for more. I'm looking forward to my upcoming ventures very soon. The next book could be coming out by the end of this month, hopefully, or next month. That's also horror. And yes, I'll be focusing only on horror now, for sure. It's my favorite genre.
And also, ABHIRUP, you said about Narayan Dharup and Ratnakar Matkari, but I believe that even their popularity has only come in the recent 4-5 years. Before
True,
that,
that's
even though they were there, the level of popularity that they have now, it was not there before. Even though they wrote such a...
Since I have never read Marathi literature, I came to know about Narayan Dharup only after Tumbar.
No,
which was a
especially
movie based on
Dharup,
one of
he's
his
everywhere
stories.
now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, absolutely. I'll just make a very short comment and then we'll move to Prachi. Just like you said, Neil sir, that their popularity came after they passed away. The same is true for H.P. Lovecraft, right? The same is true for H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Poor, and now he's labeled as the father of modern horror fiction all over the world. And with that statement, I'll move on to Prachi. Prachi, I'm going to ask you pretty much the same question. I mean, whenever we hear about Prachi Sharma, the crime thrillers or the true crimes or whatever, the crime is a word that comes in my mind. So you are known as a crime author, right? You've written 5 or 6 books about it. So, what was the tipping point? I mean, what made you shift towards horror, or what did you like something in horror, apart from Neil De Silva, SUHAIL, MATHUR, and me?
She wanted to come to this festival. That's why she started writing.
Okay. Oh, actually, SUHAIL, I planned it 4 days ago, as you know. You are the witness to it, right? So 4 days ago, I mean, that means that Prachi has some like premonition powers that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So actually, I grew up watching Z horror show as much as I watched CID, and both of them were my favorite shows. And I was a big fan of horror movies, but of course, I could not watch it a lot in my childhood because my mother wouldn't let me. He was like, "ये ऐसा देख के तेरा दिमाग खराब होने वाला है." But somehow, when I went into college, I had all the freedom in the world. So I started reading Stephen King. I started watching horror movies, especially English horror movies, and maybe some Korean horror movies. So that's how my interest was built. I read horror authors from different cultures. And after that, what happened was that in recent times, after I wrote 5 to 6 crime novels, I started working in Bombay around 3 years ago. So, sometimes I used to come home late at night, and I used to travel in the local train, so, and sometimes in a rickshaw. So, along my commute, there are a lot of places in Mumbai that become very scary at night. So, nothing's ever happened with me, but then, as an author, I get stimulated by these subliminal things, these things that I see, that I observe around me. So that there's nothing very overt about this, but I saw these gray areas. I used to pass by stations. My train used to pass by stations that were so dark, and I used to think, what would happen if I stranded on such a station one? So I get these kind of random thoughts, and as genres both horror and crime are dark. They are dark. They affect you psychologically, and to experience both, you have to put yourself in the shoes of your protagonist. You have to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's very afraid, someone who's trying to navigate something that is not easy to navigate, someone who's lost. So, about I think 6 months back, I decided that I had so much of these kind of scenarios built in my head, and Mumbai as a city provides you a lot of material for writing, or as much as it provides you for writing crime, because some of the best crime novels also have been based in Mumbai. So I thought that whatever scenarios I had in my head, or whatever fears I had in my head, because sometimes coming home at night I used to get very afraid. And nothing happened because Mumbai is quite safe, but I was afraid because some areas in the city are very dark, and they're very unknown. I have no idea what's going on in there. So I thought that I had to give a voice to these kind of fears. I had to write stories and put my characters in scenarios where they are stuck in situations where they are actually genuinely scared of what's going to happen. And therefore, the first book that I'm writing, I've already discussed it with Suhail actually, and it's set in Mumbai because that is where my fascination with exploring horror as a writer began. So that's why I went into horror primarily because there were some scenarios in my head that crime could not adequately accommodate. That's why I chose horror to give sort of a voice, give a face to these fears that I had.
Thank you very much, Prachi. Thank you very much. That was a nice insight. Coming here to NILUTPAL, and you have done tremendous work in horror so far, and I'm very sure that horror is going to gain a lot from you in future. Tell me, NILUTPAL, the question is pretty much the same. What is there in horror that makes you write more and more about it? NILUTPAL.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah. Just storytell also.
Yeah.
All right. Actually, horror in India is, as Neil sir already said and Suhail sir already said, it's not been, though it has started gaining momentum recently from the last 5 years, but there are a lot of things to be, we can delve much deeper into horror genre, because there are some folklores or there are some legends in various parts of India which has not been tapped yet. For example, your book, Siddharth's book, Dead
Last
Never
which time,
Die.
which I did.
Yeah, that's also based on rural legends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, we have some legends in Assam also, which are like which has not been tapped. Neil sir has written a story about Bak. It's a
Yes.
ghost. It's a ghost that lives near water resources and eats fish. And it kills his victim and takes the shape of the victim. So there are some of the ghosts which are very interesting, and I've met people who have actually, they've encountered these ghosts. For example, there's another ghost called Buddha Dangoria. That's an old ghost. It dresses in white, and you can find him near temples. It protects the temples. Then there are Puali ghosts, we say, Puali Bhoot. That is like tiny ghosts that resides in kitchen, and they, steal foods
The
and other items
poltergeist.
from the
Roti.
kitchen. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
And there's another place called Mayong. If most of you,
Mayong,
I think,
yes.
I think
We
you
have
people
Mayong
know.
in Haunted.
Yeah, exactly. Mayong has legends around it. We can, create 4 or 5 books around Mayong if you want, because every Assamese has a story to tell about Mayong. And I've met people who have given me first-hand experiences in Mayong. So basically, what drew me towards horror is that there is one thing which is called horror non-fiction. I want to delve into that basically, because horror fiction is rising, yes, but horror non-fiction is gradually gaining momentum. We have seen Haunted from Neil De Silva sir. There's another book called India's Most Haunted by K. Hari Kumar. That's also based in real hauntings. And another book that's doing really good is Ghosts of the Silent Hills. That's
Yeah.
also based on true hauntings.
Yeah, and the Spirits Talk to Me is going to release this
That's
month.
coming up.
again.
Exactly.
Neil and Sarojit.
Sarvajit.
Yeah, yeah.
Suhail has been listening very carefully to you, Nilutpal. You're getting an offer soon.
I got something already. I'll tell you personally.
Okay.
Okay. And then the book I'm right now working is based on a crime story. It's based on a true crime based in 1970s Assam. I got drew to that story basically because of the horror thing.
Mhm.
Once a friend came to me and he was telling me that, do you know there's a bungalow in that place where something very, spooky happened. There are 3 murders that happened there. Can you write a story around it? Then I delved into it, and then I started looking for newspaper cuttings and all. And then I found the story, which is very interesting. The book will come out soon. And when we read about that bungalow, basically, we found that there are legends around that bungalow. There are many ghost stories, and there's a tree near that bungalow, which also is said to be haunted. So when I got attracted to that, story, I started writing that story, and then I've kept that horror part separate because that will again give me some fodder for the next book. So that's why.
But India does need a book like the Amityville Horror. Something that is coming out from a true story. So we
Yeah.
don't have that kind of a true crime horror which has really, really shaken us. I'm talking about literature. So in literature, such a story has never been attempted. So that's a very wide open field. All horror writers may listen to it. Something in crime horror that would do very well.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, that is the basic idea about horror. What drew me towards horror.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's very important, the point that Nilutpal mentioned and Neil also mentioned, that it's very important to bring out the local legends and local folklore out into the mainstream. We were discussing about some of the regional horror authors and why they've come into the mainstream of late is because they were writing in a regional language. So I think Abhirup mentioned that he couldn't read Marathi. So obviously that problem will remain because not everyone
Absolutely.
can read every language. But then the moment that you write in English or it comes as a visual adaptation, then more and more people get to know you. But at the same time, it's very important to keep these stories alive from one generation to another. And the beauty is that while the story may remain the same, the way you're narrating it will be different. Every author has their own style of telling a tale, telling a
Absolutely.
story.
Absolutely.
So the moment they tell stories from their areas, it will surely inspire someone or the other, maybe 20 years, 30 years from now, to probably revisit those tales and write it in a different manner once again. So it's very important to keep the heritage alive. In fact, I was hearing an interview of Mr. Gulzar, and he was saying that sometimes he uses slightly odd words in his lyrics. Though I differ and disagree on sometimes because I think mostly they are odd. But the point is that he said that I use those words because they are colloquial terms. So if I don't use them, people may forget what these terms were. So in a similar parlance, bringing these stories out to the mainstream and making people aware about it is always a brilliant idea which should be encouraged. So it's a
This
great
is
thing
what
that we are discussing that.
this is also what I want to add on to what Siddharth said, that why was horror absent from the Indian scene for so many years? The reason is because horror in India, even Ruskin Bond's horror for that matter, had a very colonial hangover. So our horror was,
Exactly.
more of a European kind of horror, which was set in some place like Shimla or Missouri or somewhere, which was, still quite of British influence over there. So when I started writing Maya's New Husband, that was one of the first stories. I'll not say the first because there are a few that also came before that, like the Song of Kali by Dan Simmons, a very good book. So we tried to for the first time bring this Indian lore and Indian legend. So we told a truly Indian story with the Indian horror element, which was not done in literature. And I don't know why people were not alive to this for a very long time. But when we did it, because this is the kind of reviews and comments that I have also received, that for the first time I'm seeing an Indian story told in a horror sense.
Okay.
So maybe that brought the spurt.
True, and I
I
think also
totally
most of
agree.
Ruskin Bond's work in horror, if you look at it or if you compare it in terms of writing and in terms of editing those books, a majority comes in the latter part. So there are several books that he's edited or compiled, which
Yeah, yeah.
have stories from various other authors
Various
like Rudyard
different people
Kipling,
he
so on
has
and so forth.
collected together. Yeah.
But yeah,
Right.
so even the stories that he was writing was just a fraction of that. So really, yeah, so the surge in horror fiction has started,
No, not
in
not
this decade.
not taking away from his genius at all. He's an amazing writer, and he
Of course.
really pulls you in with the atmosphere. He really does that. But the thing is that now people have become acquainted with pacier stories, I would say, or more from the local flavor.
Maybe scarier, yeah. So his stories are
Maybe
not
maybe the
scary.
reason is
And
also in the spurt of Netflix and Amazon and stuff. People's habits of consuming entertainment have also changed. Now it is no longer sitting languorously with a book and reading for hours and hours. Now it is like quick. You want everything short. Even the publishers now say keep your book shorter. So everything has changed, and bringing a local flavor immediately equates you to the lowest common denominator, which is what makes the book reach out more.
No, I remember there was a publisher who told Neil to make his book shorter, so he just cut down the page size.
That is the best answer, I think, to a publisher.
Yeah, it took me 3 months to do that.
Okay,
yeah,
guys.
you had updated on that.
Okay, guys, I just want to be a little bit on time, on schedule. So my next question to you is, Neil sir, and Neil sir, just tell me, we are talking about that horror has come a long way from where it was a couple of years ago, but still there is a prejudice against horror genre.
Yeah.
Prejudice against horror genre, I'm not talking about the publisher level, because the publisher also, SUHAIL will answer better, I think.
So that is
So
so
it's
well.
about reader's point of view. I mean, I've often heard, and I think many people around me also have heard these kind of reactions that, अच्छा horror story है, अच्छा horror क्यों लिख रहे हो भाई? अच्छा अब तो डॉक्टर और मेडिकल कुछ मेडिकल का होगा नहीं, तो कुछ अच्छा लिखते हैं यार, मतलब ये horror क्यों लिख रहे हो? अच्छा horror है अच्छा ठीक है साहिल सिद्धार्थ I'm very good friend and I'll definitely read your book but yeah horror is something that I don't read. I actually don't understand this because when we talk about the horror word, horror is a very broad thing, you know. It's not a single, it's not every horror story needs not to be a terrifying because horror is generally a very broad term. My sense of writing a horror story is I'm just writing all stories are based in small towns. There are characters, there is a drama between them, प्यार भी है, धोखा भी है, बहुत कुछ है. And then there is some supernatural element, that is it. But it is just like a simple story, a normal drama story. And the day when I become a author, when I terrify you, actually, that will be the day then, you know, I'll be something high. So why there is a prejudice? I mean, people just say, अच्छा horror है, okay, I stay alone, मैं अकेले रहती हूँ, मैं अकेला रहता हूँ, या यार मुझे horror पसंद नहीं है, या ये ऐसी चीजें मुझे believe नहीं है. Neil sir, very quick reaction from you.
Siddharth, first and foremost, even I used to feel that there is a big prejudice for horror when there's, you know, like, but after writing so many books, I have come to feel that there is an audience. There is a very large audience for horror. Horror is quite a popular genre. So I'm going to completely, you know, go opposite to what you're saying. What we say that horror is not read, you know, this is more like cribbing and ranting, which we have been doing for a long time. But that is also true for the romance genre of a historical fiction or mythology or anything else, because there will be people who will not want to read that genre. It's there everywhere. Horror, the only challenge is we write very raw stuff, you know, very gritty, and very few people can take it because they need a kind of courage to do that. But once they have done it, then people will be hooked. They are hooked to the genre. I've been seeing it. So a lot of my reviews, if you see, they go on in that thread. I never read a horror book before, but so the reviews start like that, and then they go on to give 4 stars and 5 stars. So the audience is growing. It's a very quick reaction. Every genre has people who will say that I don't read it. I don't read, for example, horror. I don't like to read a lot of political stuff, so I just keep away from that. So, you know, I am not an audience for that. So same way, there are people who are not an audience for horror. Why do we want to bring them over? They will eventually come when the stories are good. So let us focus on just giving good stories, and that's it, and building our audience. And Bhoot-Con is a step in that direction. Thank you for that, Siddharth.
Thank you so much. I think it is just a beginning, humble beginning. It goes far away from here. And now, Suhail, since you have already answered my second question, so what are the challenges in pitching a horror novel to the publisher? I'll ask you one question, Suhail. In the 90s, the Z horror show came, right? And after that, we have shows after shows on television. ABHIRUP was there, and Cheek was there, and was there, X Zone. Shows have been there on the Indian television scenario regularly. It has not been there. But horror authors were not there. And today when we are talking about that horror non-fiction is doing well, but horror fiction is not doing well. I'm sorry, the non-fiction is doing well, but the horror fiction is still finding its maybe for one.
I mean, there is no demand for horror fiction.
Horror fiction is also doing well. You know, like, I don't know, Suhail must be telling from the publisher point of view, but I'm speaking from the reader's point of view. I don't see a big kind of difference between my fiction and non-fiction books in terms of their receptibility. I don't know about how the publishers, that is a different thing, but
that's my question to Suhail, and in fact I've asked him a couple of times, why do publishers look at horror non-fiction and prefer it to
let us all gang up on Suhail now with this question.
Yeah, Suhail.
No, he's not a publisher.
Enlighten us.
He's their representative.
He's just whatever he answers, he gets.
No, I am representing the author. See, so, you know, I actually feel that, you know, everything is dependent on sales as far as publishers are concerned. I mean, I've seen authors who can't write the E of English getting, you know, signing 3 book deals in any other genre, not horror, but say romance, for example, you know, with major publishing houses. Why? Because the books are selling. So I think everything at the end of the day is dependent on the commercial viability of a product or a project, and which is where what Siddharth was mentioning also becomes an integral part, because a publisher may bring it out, but you know, at the end of the day, a reader needs to purchase. What happens generally is that, you know, the bigger the publisher, the higher the print run they have. So what happens is that if you know, you're working with, say, X publisher who's bringing out a print run of, say, 1100 copies, right, and you're able to sell 1500 copies or 1600 copies in a year. So for that publisher, the book is a super success, because not only has it ended its first print run, it's also moved into its second edition now. With a major publisher, what may happen is that they may come out with a print run of 5,000 copies and say the book over there sells 3,000. So it's sold more than the other book, which sold 1,500. But for the publisher, it's a loss-making project because they came up with 5,000 copies. So, you know, the point is that to say that, no, we are not looking at horror fiction is not fair. But maybe if maybe you know, all these people need to analyze or reanalyze their print runs, for that matter. Look at the print runs. If the book is doing well, you can come up with multiple print runs of shorter print runs which are multiple in number, because at the end of the day the book would still be available. But to simply cut it off is a tad unfair. Yes, you know, as I said, there's no dearth of good writing, and I strongly believe that it's not just limited to horror but to all genres, and Indian authors are at par with anyone, if not better. It's just about a mindset, to be really honest. It's just about a mindset. People feel that, oh, you know, Indian authors will not be able to match up to others, which is why this expression of surprise that Neil was talking about in several reviews, you know. But it's changing. I hope it takes a little, I mean, I feel that it's going to take a little longer, but I hope the time for this change is faster, because I think all of you are churning out books at breakneck speed, but the publishers also need to keep up with the same. But yeah, you know, I'll just give you an example. I was speaking to a publisher, a major publisher, and you know, she told me that, you know, Suhail, don't send me thrillers, because for me thrillers don't work. Now, thrillers in India generally work, right? But for that publishing house, thrillers weren't working, so they're not looking at thrillers. Again, as I said, they've made an effort with non-fiction. Probably once the sales are encouraging, they will slowly also dabble into fiction. You know, Yakshini has obviously come out with a noted publisher like Rupa. Of course, it was being made into a visual adaptation also. All those factors help, but it's a step in the right direction, I feel. So here's just hoping that, you know, things improve even further, and it just gives all of us an avenue, because even I wouldn't like to limit myself to, you know, non-fiction. As I was mentioning, there are only as many stories as you could possibly tell. And what happens is, and I'm sure all of you will agree, that, you know, even if you take the two books that you know, Neil and I have worked on in the recent past, Haunted and Spirits Talk to Me, they have 10 stories or so in them. So basically we've used 20 such stories in just 2 books. Now, yeah.
I've kept all of them ready.
Haunted.
Suhail froze. Okay, yeah.
So the point, yeah, there was just a lag. So you know, the point is that if we are given that opportunity to explore, these 20 stories could have been 20 books too, right? But because it's something that is in the nascent stage, everyone wants to put out their best foot forward to ensure that, you know, this is a deal that gets through with a big publisher. Once that happens, once the sales happen, the publishers gain confidence, I'm sure that day is not far that too will happen. So fingers crossed.
Just one sentence, Siddharth. I believe that horror still is waiting for somebody like, you know, a very big marketer, an author who is also a big marketer. Like Amish did it for mythology, or Chetan Bhagat did it for romance. That is what gave the big boost to those genres. In horror, still we want somebody who will go all out and market it, you know, with that kind of fervor. So when that happens,
that kind of budget as well.
Yeah. So I'm coming to that. You know, you understand that. That's between the lines.
Absolutely.
So we need somebody.
Will understand. He works in a bank.
Yeah, happen eventually. But that is the thing that I think we are waiting for. Horror is right now it's a poor man's genre. That's it. I mean, I'm talking from the author's point of view.
Okay, guys. So we are running short of time, but I would just like to ask ABHIRUP, Prachi, and Nilutpal one more question, and I want a little bit quicker response because we have another session starting, and I don't want to make Roy DeSilva wait a little longer because he'll be joining the session right from a marriage. Okay.
Oh yeah, you told us, right.
ABHIRUP, a very quick reaction from you. I mean, of all the stories that I've read of your Hold the Breath and the story that also featured in, your stories are very location based. Okay, you're a very location based writer, and one of your favorite locations is hill stations. Okay,
I love hill stations. Yes.
Can you tell me?
I was born in Kolkata, but then I was brought up in Darjeeling.
So what is your
And
inspiration? Why are you writing about hill stations?
it's not specifically for hill stations that I write, but yes, I enjoy stories and even movies which are based at hill stations. There is a certain kind of atmospheric which
Yeah.
comes up when you write it in a hill station or even a small town. I've read your book Dead Never Die, and of course I've loved it. So all these stories are based in small towns, right? So
Yeah,
I personally feel when a story, a ghost story rather, is based in a small town or in a hill station, there's a certain kind of fun attached to it.
Or in
That's
a
the reason
forest.
why
I
I
mean, both of you
enjoy
have
them.
written stories
Yeah,
which
I
are
love
set in
forests.
the jungles, in the forest also. So
Siddharth loves forests. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's how it is.
okay, coming to
yeah.
Prachi, and Prachi, quickly tell us what is one difference, main difference that you find between because since you're a expert thriller writer and now you're ventured into horror. So what is one difference or major difference you'll say that you feel writing a thriller between a thriller and between a horror story, Prachi?
So the main difference between writing a horror story and writing a crime thriller is there are many liberties I can take with horror, but I cannot do that with crime. Because crime is about cold hard facts. It's about forensics. It's about autopsy. It's about physiology and blood splatter and what and stab wounds and bullet wounds and what have you. It's all kinds of science combined with detective work. So there is only a certain amount of creative liberty I can take here. But when it comes to horror, there is so much that is unexplored. So I can take a lot of creative liberties with horror that I cannot. I can, you know, concoct a fantastic story when I'm writing a horror story, but I cannot do that with a crime thriller. That's the main difference that I find.
Thank you, Prachi. And the last question of the session goes to Nilutpal. Nilutpal, where do you think horror genre goes from here? I mean, what do you think is the future? If you ask me the same question, I'll say it's very bright. It's very bright, and we will make it bright together. Okay. But where do you think is the future of horror genre in maybe 5 or 10 years to come? Just give
Okay.
me a honest
Sure, sure.
opinion.
Okay, horror basically, if you differentiate between movies and films, movies they are not doing good, right? Because basically they are copying from the West. They're putting the jump scares and all. They are not doing it well. But if you look at books, books are doing good. All the horror books are doing good because because the uh, the books and the films are adapted in a different way. So in books, I can see it's a very bright future with all the authors that are coming up, and who all the participants as well, all the authors who are participants of this Bhoot-Con. They are doing very well. They are giving out very good books. But in movies, I'm not sure because maybe some of the movies that I adopted from books that will do
Yeah.
good. For example, Yakshini. I'm waiting for the adaptation and Haunted too.
Me too.
But otherwise, if you look at Vikram Bhatt's movies and all those movies, I'm not quite sure with that. But books, yes, definitely, it's a very very bright future.
Maybe the horror authors have to begin directing movies now. It's high time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, man. I completely agree. I was seeing what was it called? Ghost Stories. What was the Netflix?
Ghost stories.
Pathetic
story.
movie. Pathetic movie. I have to be blunt
We
here.
need
I
good
mean,
writing. We
seriously,
need good
had
writing.
these writers, had these directors picked up stories, which were, I mean, they could have approached any one of us who were there on the panel. I keep on telling Neil about, the witch story,
Yeah.
in Mundi. And I think
Okay.
if Zoya Akhtar would have taken that for a Mumbai setting, it would have worked so well. And even the other three directors, if they would have taken stories from the contemporary authors who are writing, at the end of the day, what happens, Siddharth, is that they have the means, they have the budgets, they have the actors, but they don't have the
Stories.
story.
They don't want to invest
Absolutely.
in stories.
Bang on. Bang on. And the right content does not reach them.
Exactly.
That's also one of the reasons.
No, it reaches them, Abhirup. They are, but they don't understand it. They don't understand the grammar of horror. That is the
Yeah.
problem. That's what I have seen in my experience.
Bollywood
Okay.
needs to do more adaptations.
Okay,
I
so, okay, guys. So it was an amazing session. Super Dansu if I were to say. Okay. An amazing,
Yeah, absolutely.
amazing kickstart to the session. I think it's going to be an amazing day. And but viewers, don't go because हॉरर के अच्छे दिन तो पता नहीं, लेकिन हॉरर की एक अच्छी शाम अभी बस शुरू हुई है. तो मिलते हैं हम ब्रेक के बाद. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, all the best. Pleasure.
All the best,
Pleasure.
everybody.